So good afternoon, good evening, good morning.
Manakam, bonjour.
Manakam, bonjour, Mahatmahabi. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this seminar. We're still trying to get the moderator, Sana Fernandez Ariens. We did perform all the tests, but you know what technology is like. These things happen. So I will make a brief presentation of the program called SEMENTÄ. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and especially Dr. Mani Mekalai from Tamil Nadu, and Dario Leyesa from the Philippines, and Caridad Valcourt, whom we hope might join us later. She will be joining us from Haiti. As you know, there was an earthquake there recently, and the technical circumstances there are very difficult. She's trying to join the meeting, and yet there are these connection problems. In any case, I'll start by explaining what the project SEMENTÄ is. Here's the PowerPoint. The project that brings us together today. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the technical team, the interpreters, Michael Skinner, Ana Miraz, and Raquel Gonzalez, who were speaking of the translation, translators, interpreters, and it's important to make our work visible, which is a part of this project, SEMENTÄ. SEMENTÄ, in a nutshell, is a project of feminist translation between non-hegemonic languages, with two action points: to open a reflection on the processes of feminist translation between non-hegemonic languages. What does this involve? What are the strategies? What are the texts? And what discussions are open from a theoretical and practical viewpoint? And on the other hand, there is the idea to create a repository. This is a website that we expect to launch soon, to collect all the texts that are translated, in this case at the beginning of the project, between Tamil, Philippine and Haitian Creole to Galician. I will speak about the details later on. This project is an initiative of mine, but it's also supported by the project Bodies in Transit, funded by the Spanish Ministry of Economy and Competitiveness, and these seminars are also supported by the Holy Year of St. James, Shakobir 2122. To give you an idea where SEMENTÄ was born, we have to approach a series of theoretical aspects and also practical ones. From the theoretical viewpoint, we know that nowadays the oppression against women, as stated by feminist discussions, have several cross-cutting elements such as capitalism, ecological crisis, and especially the single thinking and a series of cultural impositions and cultural hegemony that in turn translate in the use made of languages, even in feminist projects. This issue has been criticized by many female thinkers, and I was really interested in the concept of feminist solidarity. This is a concept developed by the theoretician Chandra Talbade Mohandi. She defends feminist solidarity as a project where we have to know one another and to be conscious of the historic context and the complexity of the different communities in different nations and different lifestyles that women have. So it's a concept that leads us to seek dialogue. It's a concept that cannot be materialized from the so-called transnational feminism, which is usually monolingual, especially in English language. And it's obvious that it's impossible to know all the historic experiences of women if we do not reach them in their own languages. This linguistic hegemony is a topic that I have analyzed from a theoretical viewpoint leads to many exclusions for women. These are epistemological exclusions. At the end of the day, we end up with a Western viewpoint that becomes universal or international. Apart from these theoretical issues that I am summarizing very much, the project is also rooted in practice, in my own practice in this case, not only from my viewpoint as a Galician feminist, a feminist who speaks Galician. I am committed to the language, to our identity, but it's also deep-rooted in my learning in situ and my experience with my colleagues from the countries of the global south. In this case, we have 3 colleagues, or at least 2 of them. It's very important for me to see the feminist thinking from Tamil Nadu, which has many points in common with the Galician feminist thinking, in things that have to do with the nation, with the body, with environmental aspects, and they have, of course, many diverse things, but we have many connecting points. Also, in the case of the Philippines, Daria Leyesa and myself have worked in multilingual contexts in her country. There are many different languages, and when speaking of interpreting, if we wish to establish networks or work with the women, it becomes critical to be able to understand not only the language, but also the theories and the thinking, the thoughts that happen in different languages, especially in the Philippines. In Haiti, it's also very important to me to see all the vision of oral transmission, the activism in oral language, and all the forms of resistance that occur from this viewpoint in a culture that is very much marked by colonialism and slavery that are a part of its history. All this process is eventually combined after 20 years of experience that I have as a translator and interpreter, where I see often how difficult it is to bring into a literary canon, such as that of Galicia or that of the whole of Spain, the thoughts and the works of colleagues who are writing in non-hegemonic language, or even if they do write in hegemonic languages, but from spaces that do not belong to the hegemony. For many years I have tried to bring forward writings from other colleagues from other latitudes. I have been somewhat successful, and this makes me very satisfied, but on many other occasions we find huge stumbling blocks and denial. So it was essential for me to create a space where especially thinking and writings about thinking could be shared amongst those of us who speak languages that are not hegemonic, hence the need to create the so-called practice community, according to Eckert and McConnell-Vinet, and thus develop our own ways of doing without having to always depend on some hegemonic culture or some hegemonic publisher may be interested in knowing what we do and what we think. More specifically about the project SEMENTÄ, the name includes 2 elements. On the one hand, we have the word semente, which means seed. It's the seed that may fly, looking for a fertile ground, but also to the imperative to sow. That is sementa in Galician. It's to encourage us to sow the seeds. And the letters AE together speak of the endeavor to be trans-inclusive. So it's directed not only to cisgender women, but to any kind of women or any kind of person who may have a different sexual identity. So it brings together this inclusive vision as well. So how does SEMENTÄ work? The idea of the project is to develop it in 2 stages. The first stage, the one that we are launching today, is a stage that has had its groundwork. We have met to select which texts would be interesting to contain in the repository. We have these colleagues that will explain what they are doing and which writings we are interested in bringing together to translate to then upload to the repository. Then we will select among the participants these writings that will go to a second stage. They will be translated either directly, as would be the case from Haitian Creole, because this language doesn't need mediation, or what will be the most usual practice, there will be translation to an intermediate language, either French or English or any other language that may help us use the hegemony for our own purposes. We will then select the translators for each language to perform this task, and finally this will be published. The Galician version will be published in our repository. The idea is for this initiative to be replicated in other locations where there are non-hegemonic languages, and so our feminist colleagues may use the writings that we choose for SEMENTÄ to then sow in their own linguistic communities. It's important to highlight a few things in the framework of this project. First of all, it's not an altruistic project, it's a professional project. It is my endeavor for all the colleagues who take part to be paid for their work, both the authors for giving their text and also the translators through a contractual relationship. It's also very important to think that the intermediate texts that I'm speaking about are never going to be published. They're not going to be translated into English or French for an English or French audience. It's for them to be further translated into the other minority language. And so they will have some specific characteristics that we will discuss during the next stage of the project. So, as I said, these are not writings that are going to be read and consumed by an audience in the hegemonic language. They will be specifically used within the framework of this project, and they will not be available freely, nor they will be uploaded to the website. To give you an example, in the case of Galician, one of the proposals that I would like to make to translate the writing into the hegemonic language to be able to send it further, this writing by Mercedes Peón, an article that was recently published. It's a very interesting text because it offers a review of the concept of tradition as something built historically and used by the patriarchy in different cultures to oppress women. And within this oppression of women, it also disguises the fact that in all cultures there is a huge diversity of gender practices and of identities that do not have this vision, that are necessarily patriarchal. Mercedes Peón analyzes this in the field of music and dance in Galicia. I think it's an interesting writing to be known and sewed in other countries. We could go into details about what collective creation is and all the concepts that Mercedes Peón uses in her writing. So, this is what we're going to discuss here, thanks to our colleagues, and from now on they will introduce their own viewpoints. You will have 15 minutes each to make a presentation of your writings, of your reflections. The seminar today is precisely the starting point to see which writings they have chosen within their own cultural environment. I don't know whether Susana could make it back to the meeting, and she may be... Let's wait a couple of minutes to see whether Susana can give her presentation. Otherwise, we'll give the floor to Mani Mele. Just a minute, please. Hello, can you hear me?
Hola, no sé si...
Hello, I hope you can hear me well. If that's the case, hello, everybody. Yes, I can see myself now. So welcome, and I apologize for arriving a little bit late. It was my turn to introduce the next speakers. I'm fortunate to have met them personally. The three of them are three women, three feminist activists that once came to Galicia, and they shared their knowledge with us. In the three cases, it was also thanks to María Reimóndez, whom we have to mention as a very important cultural mediator, as she has brought us together and put us into contact through the NGO, Implicadas no Desenvolvimento. And I think Manimeli even came several times, and the three of you have been to Galicia, sharing meetings with local feminists and other colleagues from the world of culture, from the world of cooperation, in order to share your knowledge with us. I think it's very important to have you with us today, because you are women that were also put into contact from different worlds. You come from three different spaces: Tamil Nadu in India, from the Philippines, and from Haiti. But the three have in common that they are activist feminists. They are activists in the field of cooperation and working with women's groups, and the three of them have a very profound knowledge of the spaces and the contexts where they work. The three work in rural areas, in areas with a context of poverty, in some cases extreme poverty, and what they have managed to do with their groups is to empower and make the lives of the women in their spaces much better. Manimeli is a professor at the Baratadisa University in Trichy, and she leads the Women's Studies Center, and from there she has done a lot of work in training, education, and also raising awareness about feminism in her country. She has a gender master, she has created several gender groups and clubs at several universities, but one of the most interesting things of what she does is precisely the implementation of her work as an economist, as a university professor, implementing this to the Foundation for Working with Impoverished Women. She has published many articles, and she has been awarded many prizes internationally for helping women create micro businesses and also microfinancing. She has studied a lot into the world of micro businesses to help women exit poverty, and she has put it into practice in the real world of Trichy in Tamil Nadu. Caridad de Valcourt, whom we hope might be able to join us soon, has a lot of groundwork experience. She's a social worker specialized in working with farmer women, and this is something that would be of great interest to us here in Galicia. She works with women in Haiti, a country which is in a very delicate situation because of the recent earthquake. She works on female leadership and participation in politics. This is something very important for us women. And in her work, she has been developing it in Haiti. Daryl Leyesa is a Philippine activist specializing in gender issues who has been working in the Philippines in children's and women's rights, especially in rural areas. And she has been especially devoted recently to environmental issues, for instance in defending sustainability and the struggle against the multinationals that are trying to exploit and destroy the environment in those countries. I think we have a lot to do there. and a lot to learn from people like her. We have many platforms here against strip mining, and Daryl is an expert in this, with projects that are far more aggressive than those that are being tried to implement in Galicia. What's interesting about the three of them, for any women, is their cultural sensitivity, which is very important. The three are very much aware of the literature in their cultures, and especially the literature and other kinds of art that are made by women that have a feminist side to them. So they could be the guides for the feminist literature in their countries to give us ideas and to bring forward proposals for us to work. That's what they're going to be talking about today. But they do it with a lot of knowledge, because they know who the women are who are creating art and literature, feminist art and feminist literature, to empower women and to give voice to women. And they are the ones that will be able to guide us in this search of finding voices to share in our own space. I'd like to now give them the floor, so I will leave it here. And that's all. First of all, Daryl, you have the floor. Daryl will tell us what she considers is important from the Philippines. Thank you very much. Let's hope that everything works well.
It is a pleasant day to everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, especially when something that was written in an email message becomes a concept, a proposal, and now an actual experience. So thanks again, Maria. Thanks, Susanna, for that wonderful introduction. Thanks, everyone, for this opportunity. So there are two texts that I plan to share with SEMENTÄ, texts that would reflect the roots and one of the branches of Philippine feminism. Before deciding on this text, I really wanted to go out and visit centers and libraries that I know house potential materials for our aspiration. However, being from a country with the longest lockdown in the world, I have been limited to do so. Nonetheless, I am very much satisfied with the choices, with the text that I have now with me, two texts that are actually, I consider, part of my treasures. First is an essay by Fe Benaventura Mangahas. I have the actual material here. It is entitled Ang Babaylan sa Kamalayang Feminista, or The Babaylan in the Feminist Consciousness. I am very thankful to Fe Mangahas for sharing the enthusiasm. The author shares the enthusiasm to include her piece in this project. Why is this an important text? Well, Babaylan refers to one of the four recognized leaders in the island communities of the Philippines during pre-colonial times. They are women. The Babaylans held knowledge about nature and environment, culture, and faith. In other references, the Babaylans were described as having knowledge on medicine, so-called proto-scientists, astronomers, and foretold the future. They are spiritual leaders or priestesses, so they officiated rituals in the communities. The Babaylans are recognized and valued by society as leaders and not subservient to other tribal leaders. In fact, they were sought for their advices, such as when to plant and harvest the crops. When the colonial Christianity came to the islands, the Babaylans as spiritual leaders were discredited. They were branded as witchcraft. Later, they lost their credibility in the medicinal aspect with the introduction of Western cures or medicines. That's just part of the story. What is the relevance of the Babaylan or the story of the Babaylans, the Philippine feminist movements? The roles, or maybe the power of the Babaylans have been recognized and asserted in several fora, conversations, and even texts to be considered the roots of Philippine feminism. This effectively addresses the question that we often face on whether the Philippine feminist movement is largely subscribing to Western feminism, or does it have its own roots with babaylanism. The text actually opened with a particular incident on how in one of the 1987 conferences, it was pointed out by a male historian that Philippine feminism is rooted from the babaylans, and how in response in that conference, the feminists said that the babaylanism may be detached already from the concrete situation and realities of the times. They further explained that it was enough that existing feminist theories such as liberal feminism, Marxist feminism, radical feminism, postmodern feminism were able to provide the analytical framework needed at that time. And friends, that was just the first page of the text. So it was really very exciting. It is an exciting material for me to share with the SEMENTÄ platform. Published in 2015 by the University of the Philippines Diliman Gender Office, but originally read in another 2015 conference. The text covered topics on who are the babaylans during the time of Spanish colonization, which included the list of rebellions led by the babaylans against the colonizer. Personally, this information is powerful, mainly because I do not recall in any of my history classes since I was a student, on information that tells us about babaylan-led or women-led rebellions. Towards the last part of the text, it covered the progress of the revolution against Spain until the American occupation. It particularly highlighted the traits of the babaylan as it manifested in the prominent women leaders who forwarded the revolutionary cause and later on the general aspirations on equality and rights. The text ended with the success of the women who pushed for the right to vote in our country in the 1930s. So, what I particularly like with the story of the babaylan, the text of the babaylan, and its relationship to the next text, which I plan to offer to the SEMENTÄ platforms, that it is a continuation of the narrative of justice and freedom. The second text is from this book called Lorena. It is a chapter of an autobiography of another young woman leader in our history, Lorena Barros. Admittedly, I have yet to communicate with the author, Pauline Marie Hernando, but this is actually just a proposal. No? I'd like to share with you briefly my intention. I offer to translate a chapter that dealt with ang makibaka sa buhay ni Lorena at ang kababaihan sa loob ng militanteng legal na pakikibaka. So it's a mouthful. It means the role of makibaka in the life of Lorena and the role of women in the militant legal struggle. Makibaka as a word means to struggle, but as an acronym, it stands for the movement for freedom by progressive women, or Malayang Kilusan ng Bagong Kapakanan. It was organized during the early years of the Marcos dictatorship rule. In fact, the first organization to hold a public protest after the declaration of the martial law in 1972. This particular chapter illustrated Lorena's role in the organizing of women as part of the national democratic struggle. Parts of the activities of the Makibaka group was setting up plans ranging from mounting protests against sexist beauty pageants, the Miss Universe Philippines in the 1970s, to addressing welfare needs such as daycare, to organizing sectoral demonstrations among students and workers. Again, all this is just a chapter of the whole book that tells the story of a young woman, poet and activist named Lorena, who offered her life to bring our country closer to dismantling the 20 years of Marcos dictatorship. This is the story of Lorena, who helped nurture the women's movements that we are now, composed of different organizations, associations, clusters, federations, coalitions, alliances, all wanting to dismantle patriarchy. So to end, friends, the experiences and history of women as presented in both this text were key landmarks in the development of the Philippine feminist movement. It is worth sharing to the SEMENTÄ platform because through this text, we affirm the need to trace our roots and gather evidence of our strength as women, which were and have been the targets of oppression in our common histories of colonialism and dictatorship. Second, we celebrate women's contribution to liberation and freedoms in specific moments of our histories. Padayon sa pakikibaka, maraming salamat. Onward with the struggle. Thank you very much.
As I said before, Caridad Balcoude is an activist feminist from Haiti, and she's going to talk to us about what she recommends in Creole literature. So, Caridad, you have the floor. So, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'd like to especially thank María Reimóndez for this very interesting proposal. I'd like to thank her for organizing this and inviting me. The text that I wanted to choose, well, it's not easy to find something feminist in Creole literature. We have many movements, we have many works, but we don't really have scientific documents on feminism or feminist reflections. All the documents we have around feminism are usually written in French, not in Creole. We do have some training and education material in Creole, but if we want to speak about texts that are feminist, we don't find many in Creole, and it wasn't easy for me to find such a text to add to this project, but I managed to find one. It's a text that speaks about a social problem that is very much in the limelight in Haiti. It's of great concern. It speaks about the economic violence against women in rural areas in my country. And there are reflections around the role of this economic violence and the role of women in rural areas. It's very important in Haiti. There are lots of armed gangs, and in this text they try to connect the link between economic violence and the establishment of these armed gangs. The author of this text is a facilitator. She works in the field and she fights for women's rights and against white hegemony. This person has a great experience in fighting for women's rights in rural areas. The text was written to facilitate a discussion workshop on the role of women in the year 2020. There were two organizations, women's organizations, that organized these workshops, and there is one association, Women in Action, belonging to two different communities, one from the city of Jelimi. So the text that I have chosen, in the text, the author says that economic violence is a total control over financial and material resources from the viewpoint of production. But the approach that she gives, she says that husbands never want to give money to their wives and that will not help their wives, and sometimes the husbands are demanding lots of things in exchange. This type of violence is very dangerous because it's invisible. In society, it is not seen as physical or sexual violence. It is something that society is ignoring. They cannot see it, and yet it's leading to many problems in the background. So, women in rural areas in my country are living this violence from a very young age, and they depend totally on their male partner, their husband, and they cannot earn a living on their own. And when they grow up and become adults, they lack training, they cannot exercise a trade, and they can't be helped by their mothers either. So when the women reach such a situation, they can either continue to live with their spouse, with their husband, or they may find another and enter into a cycle of successive motherhoods, or having several husbands, polyandry. But there are other cases when the women leave the countryside and they go to the city looking for a job, and they have to leave their children behind. The fathers are usually absent, and so the children remain on their own, and this leads them to fall into juvenile delinquency, and young boys and young girls enter this vicious cycle of danger and may end up in these violent gangs. So we have these children, these boys and girls, who are living in the streets. They are approached by these armed gangs. And we've also seen many cases in which women are suffering when they live in foster families, and sometimes they abandon these families. There was a report in the year 2004 which highlighted the fact that when these children were younger, they mostly issued from rural communities, and they were sort of captured by these armed gangs. This was according to a report from the year 2004. And all this is deep-rooted in poverty, but also in the absence of any government policies to overcome the situation. But underlying this is the lack of responsibility of the parents because of this economic violence against the women, against the mothers. And this text speaks of this social problem, which is very current and very much concerned in Haiti, which portrays the relationship between economic violence against women in rural areas and the proliferation of armed gangs. These are two aspects of this very common problem in Haiti that no other organization or party or social agent, even feminists, have had taken into account. So the text tries to approach this discussion from the viewpoint of laying out potential solutions for the problem by highlighting that it's not only a problem of poverty or the absence of institutional aid, because underlying all of this there is a lot of gender violence, the violence that is suffered by these women on a daily basis. It's a huge problem, because 32% of these children, if the fathers had not engaged in economic violence against their wives, 32% of these children would not end up in the armed gangs. So it's not only a question of poverty or a lack of institutional action, but it's a lot to do with economic gender violence. This is what the author wished to prove in her work. It's a very important text that feeds the discussion in Haiti, and it was written by a woman who works with women in rural areas. The workshop was also organized not by major organizations, but by local organizations who work in rural areas. This was to prove that it's very important to take into account all the discussions, all the reflections by all the women who are living in such a situation of gender violence. It's a very important text for us in Haiti, for those of us who work with women and for those of us who are concerned about the situation in my country. This text sheds light onto another part of violence that had never been taken into account before. Thank you very much. Now it's Manimeli's turn. Manimeli, could you tell us about the text that you have chosen for Tamil Nadu, from Tamil Nadu? Are you there, Manimeli?
Yes.
Welcome.
Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you very much. The outset, I thank both Maria and Susanna for inviting me, and also taking very important initiative in the seminar on how to select feminist texts written in non-endemic languages. And it was already briefed by Maria, the very objective of this. So I appreciate the initiative. I have taken 3 texts, which I will be presenting one today. That is about Sivagami. She's a feminist writer, activist, and administrator in Tamil Nadu. And her article is Land, Women's Breath and Speech. This is what it is termed. So she was the Indian Administrative Service officer for 29 years in her career and left her service and joined politics. And for obvious reasons that she could not get along with some issues there in the administration. So based on the teachings of Bhima Rao Ambedkar, the architect of Indian constitutionalist and political leader, she founded a party called Social Equality Troopings. It was done in 2009. Currently, she works intensively in the party to reach the people to ensure their land rights. So the very and the land, she kept the land as the center, which will definitely recognize and promote the agency movement, quote unquote. So that is the point on which it started. So let me structure my presentation in 3 components. One about the kind of writings in Tamil, feminist writings, and moving to the content, the relevance of this text by Sivagami and the context, and finally summing up. So as far as the Tamil feminist writings is concerned, you see the local language has its own advantage, and it has the production of knowledge in the local language must be recognized with whatever form in which it deserves. And this, particularly the postmodern feminist writings, I am confining this, Sivagami also falls in that, made definitely a difference by incorporating feminist and marginalized perspectives. And they integrated the popular beliefs and stereotypes, the hypocrisy which existed in presenting the social realities. I can recall what Ambai was giving a clarion call to other feminist writers, that why don't you all come out and stop writing the stereotype and reinforcing the stereotype, but present what is actually happening in the social realities. And she, this writer has also questioned the patriarchal exploitation and glorification of women, which has been found in the mainstream thinkers' writings, and pointed strongly on the social discrimination exposed to the social realities of women. So these almost a group of postmodern feminists who entered in the 1990s in the Tamil writings created a language of their own and contributed to break the patriarchal and hegemonic trend that was prevalent earlier. And so such progressive feminist writings in non-hegemonic language, the people's language, brought a new trend and identity for Tamil feminist. And it has also influenced by, these writings have also been influenced by the context in which in Tamil Nadu you have the Dravidian movement bringing base for alternative perspective, feminist perspective built, as it goes as inbuilt also. And freedom movement, the reform movement, the self-respect movements, all these also contributed to create a new modes of expression among these feminist writings and set an agenda of social reformers, and therefore right from the earlier context of promoting widow remarriage, banning of child marriages, to the contemporary building of SHG movement, that is self-help group movement in the grassroots. All these could be somewhere spelled out, and so also here in Sivagami's text. And I've also have some list, but I'm skipping it. There are a number of feminist writers who really are also prominent and contributed to. So Bama, Kuti Revati, Malati Maitri, Salma, all these. Some of them have visited Galicia also. And they created a new language reflecting women's voices, needs, and issues, and provided a constructive feminist critique. And there is a whole gamut of young feminist poets also, starting from Ilambirai, Kavin Malar, etc. And they are also making a mark. So the three texts which I was pointing, one is about gender-based violence and caste patriarchy by Gita. Second one is female infanticide, customary tradition or contemporary failure by Vasanti Devi, a senior professor and vice chancellor also. And the third one is about land, women's breath and speech by Sivagami. So I made a choice to Sivagami's text. And the context in which this particular text is to be described or discussed is about the kind of the struggle that the most oppressed community, namely the Dalit in the Tamil Nadu, facing. It is the whole country issue, also the nationwide issue, and thanks to Dr. Ambedkar, who led the campaigns across the country and was responsible for bringing the law also for a Land Ceiling Act. So during the British rule, long back in 1892 itself, there were orders to distribute the Panjami land, that is the land to the depressed class, that is the Dalits. But unfortunately, still these people are struggling, and they have they had around 1.2 million acres of Panjami land to be distributed for these people, but unfortunately it was not, and therefore it is a persistent issue to be resolved. And she touched upon that particular issue, that is land. Of course, other writers have also written on that, but she was emphasizing and emphatical that land is for livelihood, and land should be taken as the source of livelihood, cannot be taken as asset or whatever form in which it has been conceived of. And as I already pointed out, Ambedkar led national campaigns in land rights for Dalits since 1916, way back in the beginning of the century. And in Tamil Nadu, it is the Dravidian movement and Periyar's, E.V.R. Ramaswamy's Social Justice Party, the Self-Respect movement. All these contributed and influenced on the issues of questions of caste, gender, and religion. To be very specific, the recent struggle on this Panjami land or the Dalit land, which is supposed to be going to them, but is not yet completely done. It's not that the state hasn't done anything; it has attempted, but hasn't distributed the entire land, which was in 1892 itself was allocated. And so the Panjami land restoration movement, Kanjipuram, where more than 10,000 people came together because there were around 300 acres of land in that particular place called Karanai, as per the records of 1933, which were belonging to Dalit but not yet distributed. So that the demonstration and the agitation all ended up with police firing, and two of them, John Thomas and Elumalai, lost their lives. And now later it has become a law. It had become a nationwide agitation, but still nothing could happen. Still the condition continues, and unfortunately the women of both the families struggle without any say. And Sivagami's text focuses on this land question in a feminist perspective. So the relevance of this text is about that the land, the women's breath and speech, where she contributes. It talks about Dalit feminism, which is, I already told, Dalit is an oppressed section, and women in particular triply disadvantaged in terms of economic, social, and gender terms. And so in this, she traces the Dalit historical and contemporary struggles for land I already told since 1892 onwards, and highlighted the concentration of land with politicians, feudals, corporates. So, and it's a paradoxical condition that the landless who are always associating themselves with land or rendered without land, whereas these people who are not actually associating with land, some NRIs, the non-resident Indians, some of them are corporate owners, some of them are textile owners. So, but still, they accumulated a lot of land. And recently, there was a news that one company, one individual was about to donate 500 acres of land to Tata company. So, this is what it was. Sorry, there was a phone. And she exposes the state failure, the dominance of feudal on Dalit community in the Karanai struggle also. 1994, it was a recent one. And then onwards, I think Sivagami also started associating with this issue of taking the land to the Dalit, which is supposed to be reaching them. And the entire text presents the plight of the landless class, where 80% of them are Dalit, and their vulnerability. And she does bring out the discussions, the intersections of the caste and gender, where exclusion is not only taking place because one is a woman, but also a Dalit woman, and adopts an inclusive approach towards Dalit women with land ownership. She very much emphasizes that only land ownership would relieve the women from this oppression, double oppression or triple oppression. And the language she used is very relevant. That is the land, women's breath and speech. That is life and for livelihood. So unless and otherwise the land is actually going to the women, the women's life could not be as you expect. And concerns over the marginalized and oppressed section is also throughout the article or the text explained well. And the critical questions he raised, I already told the paradox, why so much land is being accumulated. The other one is about the failure of the state, the resistance of the state, because in 1892 itself, the lands were given by the British rule, and why it is not being actually taken to them. Then also the exploitation by Dalit, of Dalit by the caste Hindus. Wherever the land is given to the Dalit also is not now exist with them. So that is a question. And another important question is that originally 30 acres of land as per the Land Ceiling Act 1961, but later in 1972 amendment it has raised to 45 acres. So these people who are really not working on land are given more accumulation in the name of raising the ceiling, and she raises the pertinent question as to why the people who are always working permanently with land are not actually endowed with land, but the others who are not related are actually doing. So her concerns, like she traces the historical context and advocates that the land for livelihood should be the policy. So in the Mughal regime, it was Mansabdar system wherein no private ownership at all existed. So this was the original condition, and the fall of Mughal empires, emergence of Jamindar system, who were given the lease land and the land titles to be invented later. All these contributed for the kind of accumulation, and in the process, the landlessness, that is the agricultural laborers, mostly who are Dalit communities, they got excluded. So this is the another irony, that people who always work never been considered and excluded from the distribution of the land, because the land were only given to the tillers. So those who own land, they were only given later on, and the Jamindari system was also abolished, and the Land Ceiling Act 61 came into being. And there are two things that post and pre-Green Revolution, that ceiling again is to be questioned, which I have already told. 30 acres of land. Post the Green Revolution, it has become 15 standard acres. That is nothing but 45 acres of ordinary land. So why additional 15 acres post revolution? Because the productivity would have gone up, and what is the need to raise that? So now it is obvious how the state is so favorable to the corporate, industrialist, etc. And so land titles for women is not a reality. That is what she raises the question. And the landlessness and women continue to exist, and the women are not given land because of the kind of patrilocal marriages. The women will be moving to other family, and therefore land is never going to them. And see, actually, she claims so that the women are expected to be acquiring love, affection, patience, sacrifice, etc., but they have no right to own a land. And perhaps the insecurity associated with such patriarchal pressures made the women always showing these kind of qualities. So that insecurity and the pressure of patriarchy was very much connected and described in her text. And she was talking about the violence also, millions of violence registered cases, and there are a number of cases unregistered. But all these whether the violence due to tsunami, flood, accident, etc., the violence, people affected by violence, the women affected by violence is more than the natural calamities, whatever, but still nothing is done by the state. So she questions that also, that is an additional issue of the most vulnerable oppressed section of Dalit women. And she also underlines the commonalities of these women, where they have no asset, they have no land, and no education. So this has been exploited by the other group, and keeping them in such status has been an agenda. And so unless and otherwise land become the part of the Dalit women, the gender equality cannot be ensured. That is a claim. And now you are in the era of SDG, and 1 says no poverty and 5 says gender equality. And the recent global economic report also says that gender gap is widening here in India, and it has pushed India to 150th position. So in this context, if she suggests that the land and the house should both be with women, and every feminist discussion should be discussing beyond the politics of body politics. It should also discuss the land as a resource for the women. And third revolution should be land-centered liberation for women. So that is what she concludes. And there are other kinds of movements also in Tamil Nadu, land for tillers movement, and different strategies are being adopted to bring land to the Dalit. And Krishnamal Jagannathan in Nagapatnam is one such example. I can give many examples. And so in the context, I have taken this text, Sivarami, because she is not just a writer, she also now turned activist and also politician, and trying her best to reach the people to ensure that the lands are being distributed. And also one more inspiration is that her the economic theory of trickle down, where one who got benefited should go back and render to the same community. So that is happening. Sivarami is from a better of family and with educated parents, and now giving them back through her active role. So women's writings do influence others, and it found in non-hegemonic language, people feel closer and benefit. Sivarami's writings, activism in people's language is very much paying its dividend by through her action. And I appreciate the influence that is now she's making with the people, and I wish that this particular piece of work would be common in the other two countries also, which we have just listened to. And her claim that land is for livelihood should be the policy, and that has to be taken, and that is the reason why I have taken this text also. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Ben interesante escoitarvos as tres.
Thank you very much. Very interesting to listen to the three of you. What we can do now is open a round of questions and answers, comments, especially questions to any one of the three speakers, because it's a privilege to have them with us today. So what we're going to do is you can post your questions in the chat box. This is for all the participants. And from then on we can see and see your questions and pass them over to our guest speakers. And if you have any specific questions about any of the items that our three guest speakers have mentioned, or if you wish to ask a general question to the three of them, you can do that as well. I will forward them the questions that you may have. I don't know whether you have any questions.
No sé si me escoitades outra vez, Susana.
This is Maria speaking.
Maria,
were you saying something?
Sí, estaba comentando.
Yes, I was mentioning that first of all I'd like to thank Daryl, Caridad, and Manimele, and you, Susana, for your presentations. They were all very interesting. As Susana said, we have some. I would like to be the first one to break the ice and ask our participants, by listening to what the other colleagues have said, do you see any common item, any point of connection with your own movements, with other texts that there may be in your communities, in other language communities?
No sé si queredes acender as cámaras.
I don't know whether you want to switch your cameras on. Ariel, Manimele, Caridad, it will be interesting to see your faces now for the discussion. So, Manimele was speaking about this text about the use of land. I think it's interesting both for Haiti or the Philippines. It's a topic of interest. Or Caridad was speaking about the importance of delinquency and gangs and how this interacts with women's poverty, these armed gangs that may be present in other places too. And Daryl also mentioned two very interesting texts from the viewpoint of a history and how women have always been present with their feminist perspective in the freedom movements against colonialism that you have suffered in your three countries. So this may be another element in common. So I do see connections. So what do you think? Would you think it's interesting to be able to access to these texts in other countries, not only for the sake of translating them through a hegemonic language into Galician, but also to translate them into your own languages?
I very much feel so. I agree with Maria that there are connections, and all the three texts have some commonalities, and it also brings us the issue that every country faces, the forms of issues, but still it is what I should say vulnerable. It is connecting the vulnerability or vulnerable sections of population. Here I was talking about the Dalit, whereas in Haiti it is the juvenile delinquency. I'm really concerned with that. So it is a vicious cycle. She herself was pointing out that my question is that what is the state role in curtailing this issue? Because if it continues, then it will be a big issue to be dealt with in future, and at the same time it does have an implication on the violence, the vulnerability, and the kind of very survival of the women. And so my concern is this text, all the three texts, of course mine is there, and the other two definitely deserves to be brought out in the non-hegemonic languages awareness, and it should be reaching, because here we are only a few attending this, and I think it will be immediately uploaded after this program, and everyone will definitely appreciate that it has to be translated, so that the global feminist solidarity will be ensured as it will get changed. The views will be given to understand to various readers. So I totally agree with Maria that it has to go and continue to be there to include more non-hegemonic languages.
Yes, what I also particularly appreciate from what was shared by Caridad and Manuele earlier is that when we describe the issues of women, like for example, the dispossession of land, we're not just saying that they are dispossessed of land because they're women, but also because they're part of other groups like the Dalit women, which in our case is also the same, that the indigenous women, the small farmers do not have access to the land because of their other intersectional realities. And the same way with the experience on VOW, on the violence against women, that there are other dimensions that affect their realities or their issues on their rights, the realization of their rights. So I am really very much interested in bringing those texts that Caridad and Manuele shared earlier, to the Philippines and translate it to our local language, because definitely I believe our small farmers here, the landless rural workers, can really relate. The indigenous women can really relate to the conditions mentioned earlier, and these issues will branch out to other issues as well. From the economic disempowerment, of course, their political choices and even their choices on their bodies are also affected. Thank you.
Je vais abonder
In my opinion, I'd like to, of course, thank Manuele and Daryl, and of course, Maria, thank you very much for this opportunity that you have given us, not only to be able to exchange our ideas, our views, and our writings, but also to make sure that the women in our countries may also have access to this information and to be able to exchange information internationally. That which has to do with land is important in Haiti. Access to land is important. There were many attempts to have land reform, but nevertheless, access to the use of land has always been very difficult for the women in my country. The problem of having access to land is also due to the fact that women depend on their husbands, on their spouses, because they don't have access. They have no access to the land, but they don't have access to the tools or the implements or the resources to make the land productive. And sometimes they choose to migrate to the cities looking for a job. And Daryl's text is going to be very useful for us, because we also have many women's movements, women who struggled for independence. It's in Haiti's history. We had many black slaves that were brought to Haiti. That's part of our history. These are elements that we have found in our research, but many of these, much of the history is not written in history books. It's not in school books, so it's important to have access to this information, to have access to these ideas, to be able to share them with the women, so they may see that the situation that we live, or the situation that we lived in the past, is not specific to Haiti. It's something that happens in other countries. It's something common that women all across the world have also suffered from. I don't see any questions or comments in the chat. But I will ask, when I was here, I remembered the writings by Ana Cabana, a Galician historian. She's specialized in the history of farmer women. And she reflects on many of these issues that also happened in Galicia, very similar to what you mentioned, access to the property of land and also migration to the cities for lack of the opportunity to work the land in the country. And I think there's an interesting common point there. If there are no questions or comments in the chat, then I'll give the floor to Maria. Very well, I was asking for the floor to wrap up with Susana and close this seminar. Obviously, I'd like to thank you warm-heartedly for joining this session. The session is going to be recorded, and please help us disseminate it. We're still starting with the project, and let's hope that with the passing of time we may maybe be able to bring more colleagues, more languages, more texts. Let's go little by little, step by step. We start by sowing the seed in a small plot of land, and eventually we may have a larger plot of land to make the project grow. So thank you very much, Dario. Thank you very much, Caridad. Thank you very much, Manimele. Thank you very much, Susana, for being here. It's not easy. We have very different time zones and very different opportunities to connect. So thank you very much. And I'd like to also thank the technical team here at ISGAL and my colleague interpreters for their words. So Susana, if you'd like to give us the closing words, you have the floor. Thank you. That's all. I'm also thankful and grateful for the invitation, and I was the one who had most connection problems. Theoretically, we're in the so-called first world, and we had most problems to connect. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to listen to Dario, Caridad and Manimele once again. I had the luxury to have met you in person and to listen to you before, but it's very nice to get together again. It's been a pleasure for me. I hope it's been a pleasure for you too. It's very nice to know what your proposals are, and I end up by bringing things together, and I hope that all the participants who have joined the seminar may bring us forward ideas that are interesting to be connected. It's important for all of us. So we hope that we can have more experiences like this, that this project may go ahead, that we may see these texts translated into Galician and your languages, and to continue to learn at all times. Thank you very much for your participation, and we hope it's been useful and interesting. And I hope the seed grows, SEMENTÄ, and that we may carry on sowing more seeds. Thank you very much, Maria, and thank you all for participating.